And I am joined by my co-hosts today. We have Carlos, who's in Mexico City. Laura is in Hermosillo, and so is Kim. And we have our guest today. If you could open up the panel, Ruben. We have our guest, Robin Krickelstein, who is, it's fair to say you're a social scientist. Robin, could you please introduce yourself? Tell us who you are. Tell us a bit about your background. We're looking forward to talking with you. Welcome to the show.
Sure. Yeah. The field that I'm part of is relatively new, so what we call ourselves is still hotly debated. But you can think of it as applied behavioral science or designing to improve human behavior. So it goes by the name of applied behavioral economics, action design, or behavioral design is another term you hear. So yes, my name is Robin Krickelstein. Thanks for having me. Such a pleasure to be here for a second time. Thanks for inviting me back. It's quite a nice venue and audience and topic that you have here. So, I'm CEO of Live Neuron Labs. We are a behavioral consultancy for large enterprise nonprofits focused on achieving large-scale behavior change, specifically for social good. So in the areas of education, health, fitness, emotional well-being, sustainability, civic engagement, things like that. Anything that helps the world really directly solve these big problems, helps the world become a better place.
Welcome, Robin. Welcome once again. Tell us a little bit about how did you start down this path? What made you choose this career path? Was it something that happened to you earlier in life that sparked this interest? Please let us know.
That's exactly right. Yeah, this has been a lifelong obsession of mine, long before gamification or behavioral economics. In the dawn of civilization in the 80s, I grew up in the environment with a mother who was a doctor of social work, and a father is a doctor of philosophy, in an environment that was very focused on social good and activism and making the world a better place. So I saw a lot of activity and was involved in a lot of activity in politics and putting roofs over people's houses, marching in Washington, letter writing campaigns, helping political dissidents, things like that. And then going home at night with my 4 brothers and my father and discussing, and also going to conferences and discussing the question, why do humans end up in these situations over and over again over thousands of years? Like, why does it seem like we solve one moment situation and 3 more explode or 10 more explode right away again? What is it about the human condition? To me, it became very clear that it was about human behavior. Those of us who get in trouble, or who are the aggressors, or those who are trying to help those in trouble, we all have this huge gap between what we intend to do and what we actually do. And no matter how powerful a technology, there's this tremendous, the problem is our human brains and our ability to actually execute the good things we want to do. So I set out to solve for that, and have been working on that for decades now, on how to use technology for large-scale and media for large-scale positive behavior change.
Sounds a little bit like the experience my kids are having. Sometimes we go right back into talking about philosophy. Anyway, it's great to have you. I'm looking forward to chatting with you, digging into this a little bit deeper, especially about your comment in terms of large-scale behavioral change and mindset, the impact mindset has on that and the origin of those mindsets. Kim, can you please introduce the topic of the show today, and let's get right into it.
Yeah, so the topic of choice today is designing to improve human behavior, the art and science of large-scale positive behavior change. So I guess I would like to kick it off with this idea. I have 2 questions, and I think that both going to go hand in hand with the topic title today. My first one is, and you touched on this a little bit, but if you could talk first about this idea of positive behavior change, because I'm very curious as to who determines what positive behavior change is. Trying to, the devil's advocate here, could it be that what's considered positive behavior for one entity or group is actually considered negative behavior for another? Or how can we not perceive this as this attempt to control others? Or is that
we're getting right to the jugular here. This is the critical question, right? many of the technologies that dominate society now that are getting so much heat for their negative impacts, many of the people building them would say that they are making the world a better place, and people are they're building what the people are asking for. And so there is absolutely a big question around what constitutes the positive options or positive behaviors. So, and I would say there's no clear answer to that. One way we like to define it is helping people with behaviors that they themselves are trying to make and do, habits they're trying to change, or and so it's self-defined by the population. However, that can be limiting in some of the most significant world problems, like the issue of climate change and sustainability and sustainable behaviors. So sometimes just getting the message out and getting large-scale engagement in an issue may not be something that's on someone's radar. But by and large, we're aiming for helping people they already have decided they want to eat better or exercise or learn, study up and get better at their profession, or get engaged in a certain political issue or social issue, and helping empower them to do that.
It's an interesting observation, the thought that what determines it, I guess, is the group of people, right? Whether it's a organization or an entire town or a culture or an entire society, or what is good for that society. Although there's got to be some guiding principles that are universal, right? I always think if it's good for me, if it's good for my neighbor, if it creates value for everyone, and it's sustainable in terms of can I gain access to sustainable resources that are universal value, then it should be good for everyone. What's the mindset around where you kind of draw the line and say, what, some of these basic things are good for everyone, and then there's some other things that are preferences. How do you deal with that, in organizations that have multinational environments, for example, where that happens? How do you demonize the differences?
Yeah, well, as you know, philosophers have chewed on this issue of where morals come from and how they're defined. Philosophers and thinkers of all stripes, and it's certainly a central theme in religions as well, and most social movements is where that comes from. So I think we're looking at, as you sort of defined it, that what's the greatest good for the greatest number of people, right? Or the greatest number of sentient beings, if you want to take it to that level, which I would even prefer. That even then, every time you have a new budget coming out in anybody's government, you have both sides of the aisle running the numbers and the ramifications and saying that doing this change is going to have this negative impact, and the other side is going to say it's going to have this positive impact. So it is contentious, but it's that debate, that discussion, that conversation that is the important one to have, as opposed to just saying it's been settled. This is what's best for everybody, and everybody blindly marching towards it. It's about having that discussion. Is this, and making that okay in your organization? Is this what's best for everybody, or is this something that's a short-term gain that's going to ultimately hurt we as humans, individually, collectively, or the world at large over time?
Right. I think this idea of altering human behavior is something that's on a large scale, something that we've obviously seen happen throughout history.
Right.
What's coming to my mind, starting with the abolition of slavery, we have civil rights movement, all these kind of key points in history that we can see tremendous shifts, over the masses. But what can we do? What are these steps to actually encourage this large-scale behavioral change? Like you mentioned, okay, it starts with the individual, but what are the steps have you discovered a process or what that looks like to help basically make that happen faster?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a variety in the field, a variety of models, and of course in behavioral and social sciences, and you have a long history of different techniques, and of course older than that you have systematized methods in the enrolling people into the Roman military, for example, or militaries in general. All kinds of places you have these like large-scale behavior change efforts being systematized, but many of them have been wrong in many ways, and that's been the real problem, is that our intuitions about why people behave the way they do and how to improve that have been very, very wrong. We have a lot of folklore around that, and therefore that's an explanation for why many human projects, whether it be products that companies are making, or services, or products, programs, services that nonprofits or NGOs are providing, or governments are providing, the vast majority fail to meet what they're intended to do, or even backfire, because we have this sort of folk wisdom sense of why people do what they do. And so we're starting to make big advances on that because of the ability to observe human behavior and track it.
So what is some of the folklore that needs to be disrupted? Get out of
Sure.
Forget this.
Sure. Yeah. So a quick answer to the last question is just that I personally have formulated what we call the hero behavioral framework to solve for this. But to correct for some of this folklore, a lot of it has to do with this belief that humans can grow up. We actually, when we keep begging asking our kids to grow up, or we joke with friends and say, "Oh, grow up," like what kind of behaviors is that we're expecting them to do? You guys?
Okay. So, okay, I'm a mom. I have an 8-year-old, a 2-year-old. So I think to be a bit tougher, like to be able to resist things more, this idea of not being so explosive with our emotions, thinking about other people beyond yourself. Right.
Planning for the future, remembering to do things, weighing.
But at the same time, the challenge with that is also this idea of being cautious of not stifling or creating shame around desire, because desire and the ability to express your desire and your wants is absolutely natural. And unfortunately, a lot of that gets stifled as children when we're told to behave a certain way, to act a certain way. So it's a tough thing to balance, right?
Well, so to close that's where I was going. So to close the loop now, the neuroscience, so all these things that we just described as things we want people to do when they quote unquote grow up are largely frontal cortex executive function behavior functions. And they're things like remembering and recalling and predicting and making smart decisions and thinking about others. And that's the part of the brain which is quite new in history and is quite novel. It's very expensive. It's very slow. It's an area that does a lot of the work that we call System 2, if you're familiar with the System 1, System 2 dichotomy in human thinking. And what we really see now in neuroscience is that part of the brain, as amazing as it is, and in sort of controlling our immediate gratification drives for the ancient 3 or 4 F's, depending upon how you count fight, flight, feeding, and fornicating, or fooling around, whatever F you want to use. It never actually gets complete control. We can now see that most of the time the decision is being made non-consciously, and that this cognitive part that we consider us, that should be mature and make all these smart choices and be rational, is actually not in control, and really just gets the vote, and the non-conscious kind of makes the ultimate decision. So, but we adults are really great at pretending that we can do all those things, and we think everyone else is good at, so we keep pretending. But we design solutions for that. And so we ask people to remember too much, to have too much willpower, to resist too much, to predict too much. And really all of those things are terrible, much worse than we think they are in our brains, those capabilities.
Robin, I have a question for you. I understand that what you do at Live Neuron Labs, you draw from very creative areas, right? Like media, arts, and other fields. My question is, out of these creative areas like filmmaking, for example, or storytelling, visual arts, theater, marketing, etc.
Yeah.
So do you have any personal favorites? Number one, do you have any personal favorites? Number two is, which one of these fields would you say that work better, specifically in the tech industry? And I'm asking specifically because we are in the tech world. So I'm interested in which one of these areas work better in the tech space.
Yeah, it's video games, hands down. The video games now worldwide, it's a bigger industry than Hollywood, bigger industry than sports, bigger industry than music. I think combined, actually, it's that significant of a societal phenomena. And it's because they combine all these other fields and they're able to do it digitally. So they're very, you have a variety of reasons. One, you've got the storytelling, but you have this, because it's a digital experience, you have very detailed metrics on everything that somebody's doing, and you can change things continuously and test, you can multivariate test like crazy. And it's a field that has been aggressively testing and vigorously testing very early relative to almost, and still now relative to everybody else. They're able to get more data and test more. But also it's many thousands of years old. So you've got, ever since kids were playing with rocks in the sand, the test was, does your friend leave because the game you came up with was too boring, or are you bored? Like, we have games that have stayed stable for 1,000 or more years now. And in that, have been discovered some mechanisms by which humans can get around that are engaging, but not necessarily supporting of survival value. So there's a lot to be learned there, and it spans a lot of different other.
Well, it's sort of this beautiful merge, I think, of the two lobes, or however you refer to them. You have this. You have to use logic, you have to use reason, you have to use an element of self-control, but it allows you to safely tap into the primal, right? Like, it's this environment where we're free to tap into the force.
Exactly. Ultimately, it's the primal stuff that drives behavior, And I think if you dissected something like Fortnite, you would see that they actually, which is, according to one estimate, 5% of the divorce papers filings in the UK in 2018 mentioned Fortnite as one of the causes. So,
how random is that?
Did you want to, as we're coming back to the end of our time together, it's gone so fast, but I wanted to see if you had any, to tap back into, you said something about a hero's process or
the hero behavioral framework, yes.
Thank you. The hero behavioral framework that you had mentioned, what that is and how we might be able to apply it in our companies.
Yes. Let me to get cut right down to a precise takeaway. There are a variety of biases that make us misunderstand why other people don't do what we think they should do, right? And so there are a lot of factors which impact behavior that we judge people for, as opposed to just saying we need to improve the design. And a big one of the elements of the behavioral framework is called emotional ROI, which is, we're constantly evaluating emotionally, am I going to get a greater gain or pay more emotional costs to take this next step? And that includes all of the things. If we wanted to sum up what we just talked about, is if you could just strip out the cognitive requirements that you expect people to jump through, to read these long handbooks, instructions ahead of time, to parse difficult to read things, to remember, I'm going to tell you this now and you need to remember to do it later on. And instead, look for systemic solutions to those, provide the right information at the right time, provide cues to behavior at the time they should be done. Instead of expecting willpower, remove the temptations in the first place. Designing environments that support the way our brains work, and not expect people to carry all this weight that we think they should, but in fact, we ourselves can't.
Do you happen to have I'm sorry, Tula, you had the question, but I was wondering if you had any specific story or case study. Then. Go ahead.
We'll go right into that. I'm curious because I want to go back to something you mentioned about the recruiting of the Roman Empire back in the day. I mean, there was a time where the highest form of expression was to be a soldier for Caesar. And you had philosophers and sages that were introducing the concept of consciousness so that you weren't just robotically following everybody else, just staying in line with the herd. And then came more dogmatic approaches to things to put more controls, which ultimately created more of a society that was under this command and control structure where it's like there's a right way and a wrong way of doing things. And unfortunately, we've been part of that for a long time. And now we're in this mindset of, that may not be working very well for us because it's too restrictive and it's not realistic. It's a kind of a hoax that you could actually be aligned a certain way. So how do we create a conversation around these differences? Because I've noticed that what we're doing is we're still kind of tapping into that right and wrong mindset. My view is the right view, your view is the wrong view, and you're evil for having that view versus let's redesign a way to think through this that perhaps creates new ideas and new ways of seeing things through our collective thoughts. There might be some truth here and there that comes together to create a new design that's better for all of us versus this constant judgment and demonizing differences, which I think is tied to this mindset that took over, which was the very dogmatic religious mindset that's been prevalent for many years. What are your thoughts? How do we move away from fighting into having more of a conversation as a society? How do you gamify that?
Yeah. Well, big question, but it's very important and obviously very, very timely, if not, critical to the survival of humanity to solve in a timely way. So there's a variety of ways to approach that. One is trying to break down the issue of harshly judging, putting people on, having the idea that they are the other, they're in a different tribe than myself. And we do actually have a very strong tribal tendency within our neurology, but the fortunate thing is that we also, what constitutes your tribe, who's in your circle of compassion, is highly malleable. So you can just take a random group of people and put them on opposite sides of any game board, or put them on a team together, and they immediately start acting like they're on the same tribe and rooting together to support each other. And so you see this like flexibility of tribe happen quite readily when there's different international events or local events, when there's sports teams, or when 9/11 happened, or so the trick is partially to use these mechanisms to help people feel like they're on the same tribe in a larger sense, but also to question our judgments and say, be aware of this bias, this sometimes called the fundamental attribution error, or the actor-observer asymmetry, which is where we see other people behaving strangely and we are over-biased towards assigning that, thinking that that's some internal flaw on their part and moralizing, as opposed, but when we do the exact same thing, which you can manually construct in the laboratory, we are quick to say, oh, it was because this thing happened, or you showed me this sad movie first, or you made me angry first, or I was hungry,
I didn't sleep well last night.
I didn't sleep well last night. But we don't extend that same courtesy to others because we don't necessarily see all those mechanisms. So there's drawing out some of these flaws in thinking and making them more prevalently and more aware, making people more aware of them can help.
So, Robin, I think we have some questions from the audience. Laura, let's bring this down a little bit more of a micro level of things that we can control, right? At least at a company level. I think, Laura, go ahead. I think there's a question from the audience, and you had a question as well?
Yeah, so first, the question from the audience is, which are the expected results from a company's perspective when improving employees' human behavior?
Which are the expected results? So Well, it could go fantastic or it could bomb. And the de facto, the most common thing that happens in corporate change right now, as we know, is that over 70% of them fail because they're not fully aware of how it's happening. Just more integration now, but they're not fully aware of all the new stuff happening in science and about why people do what they do. So if you were to engage in a company that specializes in that, that's expert at that, and of course you can get tremendous improvements in changes towards the positive, assuming there's actually alignment, that you're empowering people in the process as opposed to crushing them further, because reductions of autonomy lead to an innate sense of rebellion, which any parent knows about their children. Adults have the same thing.
I'm going to try to rephrase that question from the audience, because I think it has potential. So what would drive a company to want to engage in changing behavior within the organization? What are some of the red flags I would say, you know what, I think we need to employ the kinds of services your company provides to affect change? What are some of the things that would drive that in terms of like a human resource or a people department saying, hey, we've got a problem here, we should address this?
Sure. Well, they're always working on that in many different ways, from improving productivity to supporting professional improvement and education, to changes in process, to trying to bond new teams together. Or even just starting new projects require coming up with new processes and getting everybody on board with how the new way of doing things is going to be. So there's a lot of interacting with humans in general involves behavior change. But if you're talking about a large scale, like hiring someone like us, we would be involved. We're frequently involved, for example, in helping corporate cultures increase the fitness activities within the workforce, or health behaviors, or trying to challenge things like behaviors that would improve that would help combat diabetes, or other kind, or stress, or improve sleep, things like that. So which can have a variety of reasons why corporations or enterprise would want to work on those.
I think it goes back to the title of the topic, right? The design behind altering human behavior, and the idea that the word design, I think, is very key here. That there has to be intentionality, there has to be purpose, there has to be thought behind it, with clear identification of problems, goals, etc.
That's right. Yeah. So in that sense, like how do you? So in designing a program, you have, again, that's going on all the time as well. But how you approach that, very often the teams may not have training in designing or design thinking in general, but specifically in design thinking for behavior change and for applying behavioral science, behavioral economics, social science to the process. So when you do that, when you follow a process that is more evidence-based and is really humility, being humble. After having done this for decades, like I started in the field with an awful lot of bravado about knowing how to solve these big issues because of the science I knew at the time, or thought I knew at the time. And the reality is that every situation is in fact unique. All the exciting things, biases and things you've learned, they may or may not apply in your situation. And it really comes down to being more humble and systematic, and really listening and have empathy for who you're designing for, and then looking for systematic solutions that you can extend out to a large population, and testing your assumptions, assuming there's something wrong. Get very nervous that there's something critically wrong with your design, and go right for, like, how can I test if that's if my belief there is true or not? Because our tendency is to try to hide that and push forward as far as possible, and having what's called a bias for an over optimism bias. So
Right. Rather to see why it might be wrong, we want to prove that it is in fact right.
right, rather find out early and cheap why you're still wrong. Like whatever your idea is, I guarantee it's wrong. Whatever my idea is, I guarantee it's wrong. And you have to be like a detective and relentlessly hunt down like what are the critical flaws. Get really, really curious and talk to the people you're trying to help and to hear really what's going on and how you can design that.
Well, Robin, we're up on time, and it's been a real pleasure to have you. I guess what it comes down to is I love what you said toward the end, which is have humility. I think that's something even a Nearsoft, being a self-managed organization, we don't have a top-down approach to doing things. And sometimes a team might decide to do a certain thing, and there are a couple of people that don't necessarily agree. And being an adult there is being humble enough to say, you know, this doesn't really materially impact me. I just don't particularly like it, but I'm okay with it. And for the greater good, I'm moving forward. And that requires not just humility, I guess it requires maturity as well. So thanks for joining us. We could go on for hours with this topic, and we should certainly have you back some success stories and some companies that have failed miserably at this, what you learned from that. That would be awesome to learn those too. Anything else for anybody else? Otherwise, we're wrapping it up. We're up on time.
Not really, Tulio. The only thing, just real quick, I would like to make a quick announcement for next week so that our audience is informed. Next week, let's see who we're going to be speaking with. Just give me a minute. Okay, here it is. Next week, we're going to be speaking with Erin Kopp from Global Strategic Partnerships. She's one of the principals of a company called Visa HQ, and it has to do with all things that are pertaining to the technology and digital platforms this is interesting, in immigration processes towards in and out the U.S. So that should be interesting. I don't have the topic yet, but that's going to be Erin Kopp from Global Strategic Partnerships right here on Dojo Live at 1 p.m. Pacific on Wednesday. See you
Great.
There.
If you've watched this and you want to participate on the recap show, that's this coming Monday at 1 p.m. We'd like you to be one of the squares here in the video, so join us. Just let any one of the hosts here know wherever you're seeing this. We'd love to have you. Thanks for joining us again today, and Robin, thanks for being with us. And until the next time.
Thanks so much. And if anybody wants to learn more, please check us out at liveneuronlabs.com. We provide a lot of material over social. We have trainings coming up, and you'll find other ways to learn there as well.
Great. We will make sure we post all those on the landing page for you.
Right here on the right. Where is it? Down below, you'll see that, and also going to be on the website.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.